Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. And today I'm going to be addressing some news that's been circulating over the past week that you might have seen about comments made by a man called Yuval Noah Harari about artificial intelligence and its ability to generate a new religious text that could replace the Bible. And it leads to the question, can AI replace the Bible, and should it? I believe the answer to that question is an emphatic no, and I'm going to explain why I believe that tonight. So the origin of this story is picking up on a video and some comments made by this man Harari, who is said is part of the WEF, or World Economic Forum, which in my opinion has got to be one of the creepiest and most ill-intentioned organizations on the planet today. But the connection between this man and the WEF isn't as strong as has been presented. Like, it's been presented he's some kind of protege of Klaus Schwab. The guy did some presentations at the WEF. Having said that, the WEF seems to be very particular about the way it plans for the future and the little schemes that it comes up with. And I don't think that somebody like him would be able to give a talk at a WEF event unless it very specifically served their purposes in some way. So the connection is not without justification. And there's been a few poor paraphrasings of his statements about AI and religion, saying that he wants to rewrite the Bible. He didn't quite say that. He said effectively that AI had the potential to write or generate a new religious text that could replace the Bible. And also he made comments about how if an AI wrote a religious text, it would be an example of a superhuman intelligence creating a religious text, which is claims that other religions have made, but which wasn't true in their case, but would be true this time. And that got paraphrased as AI can write a version of the Bible that's actually right, which isn't quite the same, but you can see the spirit in which the comment was made. It has a similar intellectual arrogance behind it about, those other religions, they're not true. But there's no such thing as a superhuman intelligence. We know everything there is to know about the universe, but a machine that we create, that would be superhuman, and that would be able to produce something that is equivalent to the Bible. The first thing I want to address is this idea that the Bible can be rewritten. Now, it doesn't seem like anyone's really explicitly called for this, but there is a sort of a tenor of this kind of idea as it's been presented, that unlike the Gutenberg press, an AI could not only print the Bible, but contribute to it by creating new pages, as though this is a cause for celebration, or something that at the very least shouldn't horrify us, that a machine could edit one of the most consequential religious texts on the planet. Here's why the Bible shouldn't be rewritten at all, least of all by a robot. The Bible is a work of literature, a classic work of literature in its own right, irrespective of what you believe, and it should be left alone and unchanged simply for that fact alone. You wouldn't go and paint a smiley face on the Mona Lisa to try and improve it, to make it more modern. You would respect the artwork as a product of its time and a great classic contribution by the human species in their attempts to understand some part of the human experience. It's for that reason the Bible shouldn't be changed either. I've sat on this very couch before and I've spoken about the journey that I've gone through in terms of what I believe in, how I once believed wholeheartedly in the Bible, and then I rejected it wholeheartedly until now I've arrived at a point where I can see more of the nuance to that book, the good things about it and the bad things about it. I certainly wouldn't seek to rewrite it. And even though there are things that I disagree with that are in the Bible, I still wouldn't seek to change it. We used to understand that even though things offend us or might go against our sensibilities, that doesn't mean we have to change it to make ourselves more comfortable. We used to understand that as a society once upon a time, but we seem to have lost sight of that now. And we've seen the rise of what's called Presentism as well, where because something offensive happened in the past, the way that a book was written, or certain things that a great historical figure did, which wouldn't be socially acceptable today, we need to erase them from our history, or we need to edit or redact those parts of the literature or works of art that offend us, because we know better now. But of course, there's a few problems with that. First of all, you're trying to judge something. You're taking something out of context, specifically historical context. You're trying to judge something according to our own times and our own morality, whereas religious books in this example were written at a time with a very different kind of morality, and perhaps for their own time they were progressive, even though by today's standards they would be considered very conservative. But you just cannot judge something in the past according to the moral standards of the present and try and erase it for that reason. But also because we need to preserve the negative parts of the past so we can learn from them. So we can have an example of what not to do if we want to create something better. But that's the solution. If something is, we feel, offensive or no longer relevant to our own time, the solution is not to erase it and replace it with something else. It's to create something new, not to destroy the old. And then if the new is really so much better, people will simply leave the old alone and go towards the new. And the old will serve as an example of what not to do, but there's no need to destroy it, and there's no need to rewrite it. That's just cultural vandalism. And it seems like the spirit in which a lot of this sort of stuff comes out is in the spirit of that same cultural vandalism. Like, we just need to destroy the past at no matter the cost. And it seems to be pushed very heavily from the top down these days, that mentality. The other thing that is really wrong about the way this whole question of AI has been phrased by the people promoting the idea of AI writing a new religious text is in the presumption that the claims of religions that went before the AI came into being were not true, and that this time around our religion would be true because the AI created it, and the AI is a superhuman intelligence. I'll go into why I don't think that the AI would be all that superhuman later in this video, but let's just scrutinize that other part of the comment. Who is somebody else sitting in their ivory tower to say that another person's belief systems aren't true? You know, we're talking about spiritual belief here. We're talking about religious belief. We're talking about things that people believe about things that have an ambiguous reality to them. They concern areas where we don't know all there is to know about the way the universe is. And so people have certain beliefs that they have of what they think the truth is. Now, that might not be very scientific, but it seems to me that there's a bit of a double standard in today's society. You know, we have this modern secular society now where moral relativism reigns supreme and anything goes, and we've got this culture of this moral relativism combined with a culture where people's sense of pride and individualism is really stoked and encouraged and enabled to the point where people can believe things about themselves that are patently not true and go against common sense. And so we have to just accept that anything can be true except religious claims. So why is it that religious belief is singled out? I think this is a very interesting phenomenon and also a disturbing phenomenon. I certainly have my criticisms of the established churches of today, but I have risen above my own ego enough to recognize that the way that they're being treated by modern societies is not very fair. Traditional forms of religion are just socially unacceptable now, to the point where people can flippantly talk about how they're just not true. And there's an inherent arrogance in this kind of a statement as well, because it presumes that the scientific atheist worldview is somehow the right worldview. And that in itself is a religious claim. And you have to make a lot of assumptions about the way the universe is without having all of the evidence to arrive at the idea that there's no such thing as a superhuman intelligence, and that AI will be such an intelligence, and that whatever AI produces as a religious text will be some way superior to what has hitherto been produced. But the intellectual arrogance of these people doesn't let them see that, in fact, they follow a dogma as well, and they are just as ignorant as somebody who zealously says that their holy book is the only right way. Another thing that kind of blows the idea of AI being able to create a new Bible out of the water is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the human spiritual experience is and the ability of a machine to reproduce that. So a lot of these atheist types, they think that the only way of seeing the world is through a strict, logical, rational lens where everything is just information, everything is just data and bits of matter configured in a certain way, and anything new that is created is just reconfiguring the matter in a different form. And that's all there is to anything in life. And the same is true of religions. So if you have, a string of information which represents the religious texts of the past, you can just categorize and rearrange that using a computer to create something that is also just as legitimately a religious text as something human beings created. The way that AI tends to work in all of the stuff that it generates at the moment. And in a world of pure logic, religion is nothing more than information, and it's just, a religious text is just poor logic, because there's nothing outside of logic. And so you can use better logic to create a better religious text. But the creation of a religious text, such as the Bible, really has nothing to do with the human intellect. Okay, it has a little bit to do with it, but the thing that makes religious scripture fundamentally different is that it is rooted in the human spiritual experience, which is trans-rational in nature. And if you don't believe in anything beyond the rational mind, then you would be tempted to see the religious experience as something pre-rational or irrational, but it's not. It's actually a step beyond the rational in the human consciousness. So I'll explain a little bit about how I've come to realize a spiritual text comes into being. It's a bit of a mixed bag. I don't think that there's any religious text which is purely inspired by some kind of a deity that is purely revealed. I think that the process of revelation the process of inspiration when it comes to religious texts is a bit of a back and forth. It's more of like a conversation between a human intellect and what you might call God. But there is certainly something beyond just the intellect that goes into it. So, the Bible, to take that as an example, has been heavily edited at the Council of Nicaea. There's a lot of books that didn't make it in. It's been heavily redacted. The 5 books of the Torah have been edited at least 3 times. Priests put a whole bunch of stuff about ritual in there that was never in there before. You've had a new God, Yahweh, appropriating the attributes of an old God called El. And, there's a lot of human intervention and human thought processes that go into many of the books of the Bible. The letters of Paul, only 7 of them were probably written by Paul himself, the rest were forgeries. But there is a kind of a core, inner core within Scripture, which does come from somewhere that is transcendent and does appear to be inspired by or revealed by something beyond ordinary human experience. Whether that's the words spoken by Jesus in the Gospels, or the words written down in the Psalms and the Proverbs, or the words of the prophets. There's just certain parts of the Bible where clearly there's something sublime and great that the author of that text has touched, and they've had this religious experience. They've had this experience of this incredible presence, and they've felt this incredible connection to the universe around them, which has given them insight and understanding, and they're trying to communicate that by writing down something which captures the feeling that they've had. And that's how you get religious scripture. And then other people come after and write commentary on that, and then you have yourself a holy book. That seems to be what's happening here. And something happens when someone has a religious experience like that, and they have a revelation that they write down. Something happens there. They touch, when they write down those words, because they're not writing from the intellect, they're writing from some deeper place inside them, which is more connected to this absolute reality. There's a depth and a beauty and a kind of eternal truth and timelessness to the words that they write. And there's also a beauty to them. There's an artistry to the way that the words are arranged, almost like poetry. And it comes from this place of depth and this place of feeling and intuition, beyond all of the calculations and weights and measures of the rational mind. And it's that quality, it's that really deep, profound, beautiful quality of a religious text that lets you know that it's genuine, inspired knowledge. I mean, to get a sense of that, the Holy Quran is another example. I mean, you really need to hear it recited in Arabic to appreciate its true beauty. But when you do hear the Quran being recited and you consider the meanings of those words, it really does come from a place that is far beyond the normal human experience and captures that beauty and that sublimity. And I've got a bit of experience in this regard myself, because if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that I've done a lot of angelic magic, including Enochian magic. That's part of my spiritual practice. And I have received what might be called revelations as a result of some of these attempts that I've made to contact angelic intelligences. And I've written down what they told me, and the words that they gave me have that same quality to them that I was describing. And it's not something that I could normally produce. And when you're going through the process of receiving revelation, one thing that can happen quite a bit, which doesn't get spoken about, is that you get false revelation. It's like with a radio transmitting a signal. Sometimes the signal's weak and you don't quite get the full message. In the case of receiving spiritual knowledge, sometimes when you're in the process of a download, so to speak, the rational mind comes in and it invades and interferes and tries to put its own 2 cents in. And so it's whenever you purportedly get any kind of received knowledge, it's important to review it and test to see if this is a genuine revelation or not. And you can immediately tell, because when the rational mind, the thinking mind, tries to mimic revelation, spiritual revelation, it just doesn't hit the same. It's more superficial, and the words kind of have a superficial resemblance to something which might be a religious verse, but there's just no depth to it and there's no feeling behind it in the same way. It just has that qualitative difference. And so there's this quality that genuine expressions of the spiritual experience in written form have, which you have to have a certain type of consciousness to be able to create, because you need to create it from the understanding of that experience. And a machine cannot understand the world in that way, because it's, like I said, it's a different part of the brain to the computational, thinking mind. All the computer can do is rearrange information. It can't feel, it can't intuit, and it can't have an intimate relationship with the universe and an intrinsic sense of connection to the universe like humans can. It can just rearrange information. The other thing I want to address about this whole area is the idea of AI as a superhuman intelligence that gifts us this holy book that it wrote, where no superhuman intelligence has ever before existed that can produce a holy book or inspire a holy book and give it to the human race. There's a couple of assumptions in there. One is that an artificial machine intelligence deserves to be called superhuman, and there's also another assumption that we've never had a superhuman intelligence before that has inspired any holy texts before. Again, because of my personal experiences, I've got some very strong opinions about why that's not the case, and that it's another example of scientific hubris to say that it's never happened before. But let's just examine for the moment the definition of intelligence, and let's try and arrive at a definition of intelligence that anyone can agree on, whether or not they believe in any supernatural part of existence or not. So intelligence is basically where you have a system, a complex system of different things that all have relationships to one another. And because of their relationships, because there's some kind of a network of relationships between them, there's an exchange of information that goes on between those things. And there's some part of the system which modulates the whole system and sort of orders it and allows it to work as a unit, which gets all of these different inputs from the network and collects all this information, and then the information that it collects will determine the response that it has and the system has to new situations. And so the more information that is received that determines the responses of the system, the more intelligent the system could be said to be. That is, broadly speaking, what intelligence is. So by way of example, you've got a smart TV versus a normal TV. What's the difference? A smart TV will remember what you've watched. It will make recommendations to you based on what you've already watched, the genres that you like and so forth. Whereas a normal TV won't do that. You just flick a remote and change the channel. What's the difference? There's more hardware and software, which allows more input of information and more different ways that the system can respond to that information. That's what makes it smart when you get down to the mechanics of it. Okay, so with our broad definition of intelligence, is there anything that is greater than humanity that has those characteristics? There is a hypothesis in some circles known as the Gaia Hypothesis, which says that the Earth itself is such a higher intelligence. That the way that ecosystems and things like that interact with each other is like a singular, huge planetary organism that we are just a part of. And there have been people who have critiqued that theory and said that it's, more of a metaphor than, anything where there's a literal organism which can be described as the Earth itself. But I think if you just broaden your mind and you have a broader definition of what form intelligence can take, then it opens up a lot of possibilities of what an intelligent being could look like. I mean, why is it that we feel comfortable describing a machine as intelligent, but not the Earth's ecosystem? I mean, the Earth's ecosystem is an amazing thing. There's been 4.6 billion years of natural selection, which really you could say is like 4.6 billion years of research and development that has gone into creating the system that is the Earth's ecosystem. And it's even longer than that if you consider all the time it took for stars to go supernova and produce the compounds and the elements that were necessary to make the building blocks of life. And so we've arrived now, after these billions of years, at a time where we have this incredible phenomenon of ecosystems where everything is dependent on everything else, and there's these feedback loops and all of this, and we've got plants which use quantum mechanics to photosynthesize. We don't even understand how it works, but when sunlight enters the leaf of a plant, the leaf is able to, or the plant is able to manipulate the probability of where the photons of light appear, so it goes exactly where it needs to go to nourish the plant. And we still don't understand how that works. So we've got this incredible complex machinery of the ecosystem, and we don't want to call that intelligent because we don't like a theory that uses the name of a deity to describe something, because that just makes the scientists a little bit uncomfortable. But we're perfectly comfortable describing a piece of metal and silicon with an electrical current running through it as something that's intelligent. You can see the double standard here, and then so we don't want to say that the Earth itself has its own intelligence, where there are people who argue that it does. And if you zoom out even further, who's to say that the universe itself doesn't have its own intelligence? And I mean, there could be ecosystems on other planets that we don't know about. Our planet, other planets could be seeded by planets that went before that had life on them. There could be intelligent beings that are sentient, that are far beyond us, that have learnt how to manipulate space and time in ways that we can't conceive of, who have been around for millions of years longer than us, and all of this in a universe that is vastly interconnected. And we're only just beginning to realize the extent to which everything is connected. And in this universe of emergent phenomena where more advanced, intelligent beings are able to emerge from a system of simpler less intelligent beings in the form of cells. We can't conceive of a higher intelligence that could be greater than us, which could be trying to communicate with us through history, and which might be trying to use something like the religious experience to guide humanity towards a future that is more based in integral connection and truth and unity. You've got to really be deliberately resisting the idea of anything resembling a god to not acknowledge that there's at least a possibility, given all of that, that there could be something greater than us that has intelligence, that's out there and is interacting with us on some level. The final reason why I don't think that AI can rewrite the Bible is more of a functional reason than anything else. I don't actually think that computers are that great. I think that they're overrated. And, you know, I certainly don't think that they're capable of writing a religious scripture. I mean, you know, we talk about how much advancement there's been in artificial intelligence and computers, but what no one talks about is how many problems these computers have all the time. I mean, you know, every time there's an update, every time you try and copy and paste some text in a Word document and the formatting stuffs up. You know, every time something lags or buffers or times out or gives you an error message, it happens every single day. And, you know, if a jet engine had this many problems this regularly, it would be decommissioned. But for some reason we tolerate it with computers and we say that they're these wonderful advanced machines. You know, and we've had 30 years now to develop really good computers for personal use, and they still have the same problems. If anything, they just seem to have more and more problems the more complicated they get. If it's because of the complexity, then that's one thing, but then how can you trust something which is so temperamental because of how complex it is? But that is the thing that's going to write the new Bible? I don't think so. So that's my video on all of the reasons I can think of why AI cannot and should not rewrite the Bible. I hope that you enjoyed that, and maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't. I'd be interested to know what you think. Leave your comments down below. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel to support my work. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.